June 15, G7 leaders gathered in Iran last month. Friends, on the surface, it looks like the traditional summit of Western powers, but in reality, it looks more like stress test for an old international order. Why? Because the table is not only filled with agenda attempts, it was filled with cracks in the global system, the US-Iran deal, the Russia-Ukraine war, and Gaza crisis, global economic imbalances, artificial intelligence, critical minerals, developing country doubt, and accusation about China's so-called overcapacity. EX believe the real point is not how polished the final segment will be. The real point is whether these countries can still coordinate it in the meaningful way. First, the United States wants to turn the G7 into its own diplomatic stage. Trump arrived with the US-Iran agreement and tried to present itself as a crisis solver. But Europe does not only want to hear Washington announce results. Europe wants to know whether in next crisis, the United States will act first and form alliance later. Second, Europe wants to use the G7 to pull the United States back in. France wants Washington to keep supporting Ukraine and to start shifting pressure onto Europe on trade and security. But this creates a very strange picture. Above the table, everyone talks about unity. Below the table, everyone is still calculating their own interest. So, the G7 is turning economic issues into security issues. Critical minerals or roles, supply chains, and energy roles used to sound like economic and technical topics. Now, they are placed instead of security framework. Western countries are not all discussing how to make money. They are discussing how to reduce dependence, control risk, and reshape the rules. This is the reality of the G7 today. It still has influence, but it can no longer easily claim to represent global consensus. This is why countries such as India, South Korea, Kenya, and Brazil are invited. On the surface, this looks like the boundary representation. In reality, it is also an attempt to bring more countries into the G7 narrative. Here's a key question. When the G7 increasingly needs outside guests to prove its global relevance, does that also show that its original representativeness is declining? So this summit should not be judged only by the group photo. The photo will look orderly. The statement will look respectable. The pitches will sound grand. This will story is division. The United States wants results, Europe wants security, Japan wants stability, the global South wants resources and that pace. At the end of the day, the lake view in event that's been disputeful, but the water of international politics is not calm. The G7 sits at one table and talks about unity, but inside every player is doing a different calculation.